All right, guys. So today on Eric and Perez, we have none other than Shane Giese. Shane Giese is real familiar with leasing, and he's been a part of the auto industry for a long time. Going back into his story on what a person can do inside or getting ready to go to a dealership. That's basically what we're going to talk about today is what can someone do when they're preparing to walk into a dealership, and what kind of benefits he can leave with the rest of the world, so that way they might have a better opportunity when purchasing a car, and understanding the whole insides and outs of those types of processes. So I'd like to welcome Shane Giese. Welcome, Shane Giese. How are you doing?
Doing great. Eric Perez, thank you
Awesome.
for having me. You know,
Nice, nice.
the car buying experience is actually, it's evolved quite a bit. Um, Before I walk into a dealership, if I'm going to buy a car, I'm going to do my research. Most of your buyers today are going to research at least 3 or 4 websites before they ever choose on a vehicle.
Right.
The best preparation is the best way when you're going into a dealership to buy a car to be prepared. Number one, know what your credit is before you go in. Always check with your own bank or credit union to see what kind of rates you can get. And then, when you choose your vehicle, be specific on what you want. If you walk into a dealership and you're not really sure exactly what your wants or needs are, it's going to take a little bit longer. The process is going to take long. A lot
Okay.
of people today are buying cars straight off the internet without even test driving them. Um,
Wow.
you know, uh, you've got the used car market and you've got the new car market. New car market's a little bit easier to do that with because you know exactly what you're getting. Used car, you're not really sure what you're getting, so you definitely want to take your time to take a look at the vehicle and demo the vehicle and look at the vehicle, make sure that it's in good condition.
Cool.
Um, Several different ways of financing right now. You can always pay cash, you can finance, or you can lease a car.
Cool.
Of course, I do.
So Shane, I got a quick question. I don't mean to kind of cut you in there right there at the thought, but let's say I'm a like a person coming into the dealership, and I know it's not going to be all the way the same for every dealership, right? So I know that everybody's going to have a little bit slightly different like model or method of qualifying a person. But in your experience, how long have you been in the business, and how did it progress? And did you start as a salesperson, and how do you think that a first time buyer can come in and get help with buying a car? Maybe they have a new kid, or maybe it's just a him and her couple. What kind of things can they expect, and then like how did you get that experience to understand that, so that way the knowledge that you give to us is relevant, and it's something that we can build a background. So like, where did it start out for you, starting into the deal, the auto industry, and then like how does that create clarity for the buyer, like when we're
Okay,
going
well,
into
let
that
me start out.
idea.
I started out as a buyer. Of
Oh,
course,
really?
I went to bought a Honda, bought a you know bought Toyota, bought a car business. I got into the car business about 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Uh, I got into the car business at selling cars, and I went through training, had a great opportunity to train and kind of learn the sales process.
Cool.
Uh, Worked for several different dealerships and eventually got into the finance. Worked as a finance manager. Then I had the opportunity to run a Toyota store, and so I moved out to West Texas to run a Toyota store. And now I'm up at Volkswagen as a new car director. So
Wow.
I've kind of progressed. And it's interesting because the further you get into the car business, the more you understand how things work. Of course, as a salesman, there's certain steps to the sale. Number one, the meet and greet. Then I'm going to get to know you a little bit, get to know
Okay.
your wants and needs, and then I'm going to find a vehicle that meets what you're asking for. your wants and needs. Find it within a budget. And the number one mistake that most salespeople make is they try to pre-qualify a customer. Okay. Now,
Right.
if, and I know you and I both have that same experience. We walk in someplace and they don't know if we can buy or not.
Right.
And it turns out we can buy whatever we want, for the most part. So,
Yeah.
but having knowledge and having your ducks in a row before you walk in, again, know what your credit is. I've had examples of other dealers that are trying to charge an exuberant interest rate for a customer with perfect credit that they don't deserve that, but they didn't know they had perfect credit.
Wow.
So you want to make sure you understand what your credit is, know what your budget is, because there's basically, there's three prices when it comes to a customer. It's what I want to pay, what I'm willing to pay, and what I won't go over. So, a lot of people come in and say, I want a $300 payment on a $25,000 car. Not really gonna work.
Well,
So
yeah, that's a hard stretch, especially like with current interest rates, right? So with the way interest rates are, somebody going into a dealership, they might have to take those things into consideration. Have you seen any kind of things like that right now?
Yeah, interest rates are going up, incentives are going down.
Okay.
So let's talk about the car business over the last several years. Car business has done a major transformation over the last several years. Used cars values went up for the first time in history. Cars are depreciating assets, so every month used cars would lose a little bit of value. The older they get, they lose a little bit of value. But because of supply chain issues for new cars, there were less new cars available, so people had to choose a used car. So because of that, because the demand was higher for used cars, values went up. And of course, as you know, because of the pandemic and things like that, the supply chain issues have been interrupted. One big thing you always hear about is the lack of availability of computer chips for cars.
Oh, right,
right now, with all the
I heard about that.
with all the electronics on the car, there's a lot of chips involved. So the manufacturers decided to start taking certain features off cars because they could either build cars or they could build less cars with more features. So they chose to build more cars with less features for a period of time. Now everything's caught back up, so you're starting to see the used car market starting to decline because there are new cars available, but because inventories are still low, there's not a lot of incentives on new cars. So you're not seeing a lot of discounts or low interest rates. Several years ago, they were offering 0% or 1.9% for well-qualified buyers, and that doesn't exist anymore. We have right now, average interest rates are 5 to 6%. And of course, the Fed just raised rates today, so we'll see how that affects it.
Yeah.
But,
How much? So I didn't catch that. So how much did the Fed actually increase the rate today? So today is December 14th, 2022.
So yeah, so they raised it 0.5 point today.
Okay.
You'll see that trickle down to interest rates on vehicles. Of course, the end of year is not a bad time to buy a car. A lot of dealers are trying to get rid of inventory. They want to get rid of everything by the end of the year.
That's a good tip. That's like a pro tip, guys. So pro tip, right. Buy your car at the end of the year because everybody's trying to get the end of the year bonuses, or I don't know how does that work, but that's kind of a great incentive. I didn't think about that.
We pay interest just like anybody else. We pay interest on cars that we have on our lot. Okay. So the quicker we get rid of them, less interest we pay, the less it costs us to hold on to the car. So as vehicles age and inventory, which you're not seeing a whole lot of today, just because the inventories are low. And because inventories are low, you're not seeing dealers hold on to cars for what used to be an aged vehicle was 180 days,
Wow.
is now, 45 days is now old.
Oh,
You know,
really?
yeah, so we see how quickly
That's like a third
turn.
of the time, right? I mean, yeah, it's crazy.
But again, like I said, knowing your budget, knowing knowing your credit.
Okay, so a person coming in knowing their credit, that's super important for them. What that kind of builds their advantage, right? That gives them advantage. Like if you're walking in with a, let's say, a 600 or a 550. Well, you're at the like kind of like the lower end of starting to purchase the car, right? I don't know what it starts at, but that's kind of, but as you move up, 650s and then 700s and then 750s and then 800s, and then from there on you basically have, I mean, free will to buy with who you want, right? Because
Pretty much, they're at your mercy at that point in time. When your credit score, so credit scores range from low 350 up to not 899 up to 900.
Okay.
So anything for most banks, anything over 700 is considered top tier, or at
Wow.
least two tiers. Of course, if you're below 600, it gives a little bit of a challenge. Now,
Okay.
there's a lot of factors that are involved in buying a car and getting approved for financing or leasing. How your history, your pay history. Have you been paying cars in the past?
Okay.
Like, for instance, Volkswagen, if you've paid Volkswagen perfectly, but your credit score is less than 600, a lot of times they're going to give you a what's called a tier bump. They're going to push you up two tiers,
Wow.
because of,
Yeah.
so they know
If
that
you, so
if you,
basically, so like if a person buys a car with Volkswagen, they pay off the car with perfect payments, and they might not be so financially, they're not medical bills or
advantage.
whatever's going on in their other part of their life. Volkswagen's basically going to say, hey, you know what, you're a good candidate with us, we're going to vouch for you, we're going to bump you a few tiers on your
Right,
next purchase with us.
absolutely, get you a little bit
Wow,
lower.
that's cool. That is
Okay.
cool.
So interesting, like I said, but know your credit. And also what I always suggest is if you have a bank or a credit union you deal with, go talk to them and see what kind of interest rates are offering. You and I have done business in the past, and my interest rates may or may not be as competitive as what you can get at your own bank,
Oh, right,
because
right.
you may have a relationship built up.
Mm-hmm.
Now we get into, let's talk about leasing.
Yeah, that's
Um,
kind of like the whole idea. I don't know anything about leasing. I've never leased, so basically I wanted to kind of sit down with you and talk to you like, "Hey Shane, can you explain to me, because I know basically from what I know, you have a plethora of information for a person who's looking to lease a vehicle, and what the differences are versus buying." So that's kind of where this whole conversation started.
so first of all, if you have questions or want more information on leasing, you can go out to YouTube and look for Leasing with Giese.
Okay.
There's quite a few videos um, that explain exactly what leasing is. So leasing and buying are essentially the same thing. Leasing, the true definition of leasing, is residual based financing. So how that works is, instead of me borrowing $30,000 on a car for 6 years for 72 months, I'm going to borrow half of that money for half of that time. So I'm
Okay.
going to pay down the depreciation. So all I'm going to borrow is the depreciation. So leases are usually 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years. And with me only borrowing the depreciation, pretty much I'm only paying interest on the depreciation. So there's quite a bit of advantages to leasing. The interest rates are lower, especially for people that are in the lower tiers. Um, you'll see that the interest rate on a purchase, it increases dramatically more than an interest or a money factor. We use money factors on leases than a money factor on a lease. And a money
Why
factor,
what well why is that? What would make a bank think that a person that's purchasing a car have a higher interest rate? Because basically what they're saying to me is, I'm going to give you a higher interest rate because we we view this as a higher risk
absolutely,
than leasing, right?
absolutely.
Okay.
leasing, because it's a shorter term,
Hmm.
the finance source has more control. With today's leasing, you have what are called closed-end leases. Closed-end leases say at the end of your lease period, you owe X amount of dollars.
Okay.
And so if you choose you want to buy the car, sell the car, trade the car, that's going to be your basis for doing that. It's interesting how that's relative right now, especially when you are, looking towards the future. Now, leasing, a lot of, leasing is really the best way to buy a car. Okay. We don't know what the market's going to do in 2 or 3 years. And I have a lot of people who were, 1 or 2 years into their lease, and because the used car market went up so much, their used vehicle was worth quite a bit more than what they owed on the vehicle.
Wow. So
So
they
you
actually
still
gained some appreciation, right? The value of the vehicle appreciated
gain
so rapidly.
equity in.
Yeah, wow, that's
Yeah.
impressive. So some of these people came in, did they use that money to secure another lease, or did they cash out?
A lot of times. No, sometimes they cash out. We've had people who have cashed out, say, I've got, $6,000 of equity in my car. I'll take $3,000 back to pay some bills. And I'm still
Yeah.
having a $3,000, what's called cap cost reduction or a down payment on a lease, And so a lot of people, there was a rule of thumb years ago that says if you were to lease your next 4 cars,
Right.
and save the difference payments between a lease and a purchase and put it away, you could pay cash for your 5th car and not even have a payment.
Wow.
That's how much money you can save with leasing.
Wow.
And a lot of people question leasing because they always thought leasing was renting a car.
Yeah, because that's what my dad told me. My dad told me, hey, if you lease a car, you never own it. You're just gonna blow your money like renting a house. And so for me, that was why I always bought cars.
Right. And so what's interesting is, if you think about that, if you take a look at what the trade cycle is today, which is about 3.5 to 4 years.
Okay, so trade cycle is like a person that buys a vehicle and then they're gonna either buy another one in 3 to 4 years, or they're gonna get rid of that one. Is that what a trade cycle is?
Get a different vehicle.
Okay.
Lifestyle changes. Maybe they have a baby on the way. Now they have twins are coming. They need more room.
Okay.
But the average trade cycle is about 3.5 to 4 years.
Okay.
So if you really take a look at it, and I always ask my customers who say, well, I'm not really interested in leasing. And I'd say, well, okay, well, let's take a look at your credit. It looks like you've had 4 cars over the last 10 years. Is that correct? Oh, yes. Did you pay any of them off? Well, no, I always traded them before I ever paid them off. So essentially you were leasing the whole time, but you're paying more money than you. Because if your buying habits are, hey, I'm going to trade out every 3
you're basically rolling the debt. So you're just like you're paying down, you're like $5,000, $10,000 from paying off that vehicle. And then you're like, that new Escalade really looks good. I'm going after that Escalade. This car I got right now, the Tahoe, looks cool, but it's 4 years old. So then you're rolling into more debt. So you're saying if you lease,
well, a lot of times, but usually at the end of 3 or 4 years, you're going to be pretty equitable in your trade.
Right. You should be.
But
if you drive like I do, then you basically waste all your equity.
I've seen you drive, so trust me, I understand that.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is people. So I always ask these people, so have you ever actually bought a car? And they're like, well, now that you mention it, no, I've never bought a car.
That's crazy. I never thought about that either. Yeah.
Paid one down and traded it, and paid one down and traded it, but I've never paid one off. Yeah. And so it's like, okay, so you've actually, like I said, been leasing this whole time. You just didn't realize it. Now, at any time during a lease, you can buy the car, sell the car, trade the car. At the end of the lease, you have the option to buy the car, sell the car, trade the car, or you can basically turn the car in. Now, a lot of times, especially with the market the way it is, the way our leases are set up, you're probably going to have equity at the end of the lease. Now, people always talk about mileage.
Right. That was my question that I didn't want to ask. I was like, there's got to be a catch.
It's a great question. And a lot of people, the only time mileage actually comes into play is if at the end of the lease, you just want to turn the car in. You don't want us to take a look at it. You don't want to sell it. You don't want to trade it. You just want to turn it in and pay the mileage fee. Okay.
Okay. So like so let me just break it down so that way, like, if I'm going to try to explain this to my grandmother or to my mom or my dad. So if I come buy a car from you tomorrow and I put it on a lease and I have it for 3 years, let's just say within that repetition period. And I put on there, because I drive a lot. So let's say I put somewhere around 20,000 miles of a year, right? Because I think the average is what, 10, 15,000?
It's about 12 to 15,000.
Okay, so let's just say I'm higher than that. I really put 20,000 per year, and I'm at 60,000 miles to 70,000 miles when I turn it in. Now, if I'm just turning the car back into you, I'm giving you the car. I'm saying I don't want nothing to do with this car. You guys keep it. Basically, you're saying that's when I would incur that fee for the mileage.
It would be sent back to the manufacturer, and the manufacturer would say, okay, you owe us, 20 cents a mile over your mileage. Now,
Okay,
now let's give you a real life example. I had a customer who did a 48-month lease
okay,
at 15,000 miles a year. So they had 60,000 miles in their lease term. At the end of 4 years, they had 120,000 miles on their lease.
They sound like me. That would be me.
Well, actually, what's interesting is that car was still worth what the guaranteed residual was. They didn't lose. It was actually pretty interesting. They weren't upside down. They didn't owe anything. So they didn't have to pay out of pocket. Had they not allowed us to evaluate the car and say, hey, look, your car is actually worth what you owe on it.
Okay.
I just buy it for you and I'll eliminate any liability you might have. And,
Yeah, that's awesome. So you guys basically save them whatever that costs for the 20 miles, 20 cents a mile times
you got to figure
60,000 miles.
You got to figure, $12,000, 20 cents a mile. So it's really interesting is, know your driving habits, and you can always lease a car and build in, 20,000 miles a year, 25,000 miles a year. I've done that several times for customers, just depending on, because at the end of the lease, they want to owe less money. Very interesting. Now, a couple other advantages in the state of Texas, we have what are called tax credits on leases, which means you don't pay sales tax on lease. Our sales tax rate is 6.25%. You'd pay 1.25%, what's called an L&M fee. So it'd save you 5% right off the bat.
Okay, so no sales tax in Texas, but you have an L&M fee. What is an L&M fee? What does that stand for?
So how that worked out is, if I buy a car and I say I buy a $40,000 car, I pay sales tax on $40,000.
Okay.
And in 3 years, I trade that car in and I buy another $40,000 car, and my trade is worth $20,000. Basically, I get, I only pay tax on the difference. That's on a retail.
Yeah, I remember this. Okay, yeah.
Right now, with a lease, if I had collected taxes on your vehicle when you leased it originally,
okay,
and at the end of that lease, you don't get any tax benefit, because the manufacturer, the lessee, who is, let's say, Volkswagen Credit or Toyota Financial Services or Nissan Financial, they actually own that car. Okay. So any taxes are really given to them. So what happened was the state of Texas said, look, you already paid tax on that $40,000 car when they originally leased it, and you bought it back at $20,000. So we're going to credit you back those taxes that were originally paid on the difference. So what L&M did, L&M is a company that manages this. So the state of Texas says, we're going to put all these into account, and then you can use those as you see fit. Okay. So with Volkswagen Credit, I'll say, hey, you want to lease a vehicle, you don't have to pay sales tax. So it's a big benefit. Yeah. The other thing is gap insurance. That gap insurance or debt cancellation is included in most of your leases.
Okay.
So if something were to happen and you were to get to an accident, and let's say early on, and the vehicle was totaled, and the insurance company decides to pay less than what is owed on that car, the gap insurance, of course, covers it. Now,
Okay.
gap insurance, you can now buy that if you're on a retail purchase as well. Years and years ago, the only way to get gap insurance was through a lease. And so a lot of people, if they were upside down in their trade,
And they
back
got
in
an
the
accident.
they'd have negative equity, they'd roll it into a new
Oh.
car.
Oh, okay.
They mostly leased that car because they were protected with gap insurance. For gap insurance, you can purchase it on a retail purchase, but on a lease, it's provided at no cost.
Okay, cool. So just to kind of put everything back into perspective, if a person walks in, and they're gonna buy a car for 20,000, 25,000, let's just say 20,000. What can they expect as far as like a price difference? Because I know there is one. I know there's going to be a price difference between getting a lease and I'm just saying in general. I know this isn't hard numbers,
Usually,
but
usually
from your experience, what do you see typically based on a bank versus based on a lease?
you're usually about $50 to $75 less a month
Oh, cool. Yeah, that,
between
that could help somebody out.
retail purchase. Okay.
Okay.
Um, you know, it's it's a pretty big benefit, you know, when it comes down to that. Of course, you still have a guaranteed residual value. If you total that car, at any time during the lease, you're not on the hook for anything, you know.
Wow.
So which is a big plus. You don't have to
Yeah.
worry about any liability you'd have in case of an accident, in case of a total loss.
Well, that's pretty good. So we're gonna wrap it up now. We've been on this call for a little bit, and I just kind of want to give everybody all that you have as far as like in balled up and in one explanation. What can the 5 things that you would say they could do to to when they're walking, what the benefits of leasing are, versus a traditional program. So give them the 5 best things that you can give them.
Um, okay, so the 5 things that you would think that you'd look for is number one, be prepared.
Okay.
Know what you're looking for. Number two, know your credit. Okay.
Perfect.
Number three, know what rates that you have available to you based on your credit.
Okay.
Of course, what we talked about is the end of the month or the end of the year.
Ah, that was the pro tip. The pro tip.
Because they're pushing. We have some funny stories about that. But anyway, and number one, know what your budget is. Know what your budget is. Know what you're wanting. Because remember what I said. There's 3 different, basically, prices or payments. What I want to pay, what I'm willing to pay, and what I won't go over. So know your budget before you walk in. You'll have a very successful buying experience.
Cool. All right. Well, again, guys, that was Leasing with Giese. I learned a lot. I hope you guys learned a lot. It was really fun having you on the podcast today. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to sit down with us and kind of educate us on something that most people might not have a real good grasp about. If you guys want to find Shane, all he said for us to just YouTube his name, Leasing with Giese, and we can find more information about the things he's doing in West Texas. I guess they call that the Plains, right?
Yeah, pretty much. So we're here in the Dust Bowl, basically.
The Dust Bowl. Find them in the Dust Bowl. All right, guys. Well, I appreciate you spending time with us, Shane. We will talk to you guys later. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
Yes, sir.